Can you bring me my hiking boots? I see a big mountain in the future. We'll be talking about the Sinai Covenant that God established with Moses and Israel, his chosen people, at Mount Sinai. As you will remember, when God met Moses for the first time, it was precisely in the outskirts of this mountain, Mount Horeb, which is another name for Mount Sinai. At Mount Horeb, in his conversation with God, when Moses was expressing much hesitation and reluctance to go back to Egypt, God said very clearly that Israel was his firstborn, making it very clear that he was totally committed to making Israel not only his chosen people, but in doing so by establishing an everlasting covenant with them. As we've seen, a covenant is when two parties come together and they share everything in common. On God's part, already beginning with Abram, whom he then made Abraham, he made it very clear that he was going to be totally committed to Abraham and his descendants. No matter whatever circumstances they might have to go through, he would be with them. And he did mention to Abraham that one day his descendants would be enslaved in the land of Egypt for 400 years. So now the time has come for God to bring his people out of slavery in Egypt. And so he makes it very clear to Moses that he's sending him back so that he would bring back to God his firstborn, making it very clear that Israel was very, very special to God. So then Moses goes back to Egypt, and over 10 plagues, he finally is able to convince Pharaoh and the Egyptians to let God's people leave Egypt first and foremost to worship in the desert and then to go away permanently. And so God now starts to establish this beautiful, wonderful covenant relationship with his people, beginning with the Passover feast that we've already covered. In the Passover feast, then, through a sacrificial meal, God is making it very clear to them, I have given myself over to you as your protector, as your provider. I will always be loyal to you. And I'm asking you through this feast to commit yourselves to me. And so they were asked to slaughter a year-old lamb or goat, and then to eat it, and basically to splash the blood of the lamb or the goat on their doorposts and lintels, thereby signifying that they, in eating that meal, were sharing the same life with God. Because when the angel of life passed over their homes and saw the blood, he became for them the angel of life because they were God's firstborn. And when he went over Egyptian homes that did not have the splash of blood on their doorposts and lintels, he became the angel of death. So now through this feast, this Passover feast, which took place on the last night of their stay in Egypt, they leave. And so then over 3 months, they go through the wilderness in the direction of Mount Sinai. And during those 3 months, they are pursued relentlessly by Pharaoh and his army and go through enormous vicissitudes, trials, tribulations. They are in constant danger of death. because they are being pursued relentlessly by Pharaoh's army. In their helplessness, they are beside themselves and they beseech Moses to intercede on their behalf, or else they will all be destroyed, and their leaving Egypt would be in vain. That is when Moses talks to God, intercedes with God, and God says, "Don't worry, I will take care of you." And so they are able to cross the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds. And when, after they've crossed over and the Egyptian army is pursuing them, that's when the waters come together, destroying the Egyptian army. And so this story is found in chapters 11, 12, 13, 14. And then in chapter 15, Moses and the people, they're celebrating with dance and joy, thanking God profusely and praising him for being such a stout defender and being totally true to his promises. God indeed is the most effective and supreme promise keeper. So then, after 3 months, they now come to Mount Sinai. And so God has a conversation with Moses. And this is a very significant verse that I would like to read to you. God speaking to Moses. "Now, if you obey me completely and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession among all peoples. Though all the earth is mine, you will be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation." That is what you must tell the Israelites. This is a very, very profound statement made by God to Moses and asking Moses to communicate this to his people. We've got to remember that God's people are not yet truly familiar with God. They are being brought gradually into this covenant union and intimacy with God. Moses, however, is very intimate with God. And so you can see God speaks to Moses, and Moses is very comfortable with God. And so God says a number of things. One, I am going to establish a covenant where your people, you and your people will become my chosen people, and I will be their God. In a very real sense, God is telling them through this covenant that he will establish with them, in a very real sense, he is bringing them back to their original creation as God's image and likeness. And as image and likeness, they will be intimately connected with God, their creator, the original, in whom they have been formed. And this he will do despite all the trials and tribulations and the enslavement that they have experienced, thereby telling them that they will experience a transformation. They will start seeing things differently because they will be examining and experiencing their lives within the context of their relationship with God, which is now a covenant. And among all peoples, they will be God's special people. But then God says, I own all the earth and I own all peoples, thereby making it very clear that God will use Israel as his instrument to bring about salvation, transformation to all the earth through Israel. And so this is very good news that Moses then communicates to God's people. And so now begins the establishment of this covenant ritual through a very profound and liturgical ritual. So the first thing that God tells Moses to tell his people is, yes, you can surround the mountain, but don't come close to it. In the Bible, the mountain is a very significant place because that is the place of meeting between God and humans. So we are told that paradise was created in an elevated place. We know that Abraham, when he was asked to sacrifice his son Isaac, he went to Mount Moriah. We also know that Solomon built the temple on Mount Zion, which is another name for Mount Moriah. We also know that Jesus was transfigured on Mount Tabor. And so the mountain is a very special place of meeting between God and his people. So they are now surrounding Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai in preparation for the establishment of the covenant. And God says, don't come close, making it very clear that he is totally other than. And the mountain is his place. It's totally other than, and they are not yet in covenant with God. So they've got to stay close to, but not touch the mountain. This is God's way of telling them, I am totally other than, and I am bringing you into intimacy with me. And this is a process that will take place as we establish the covenant. Moses is the only one who's allowed to go up the mountain. And so it's quite an arduous journey that Moses makes, which makes it very clear that establishing this covenant relationship is very serious business. That is when God offers Moses the Ten Commandments. The difference between God offering the Ten Commandments directly to Moses and the laws, the Ten Commandments he offers in chapter 20. In chapter 19, he begins establishing the Sinai Covenant. In chapter 20, as I said, he gives Moses the Ten Commandments. And then in chapters 21, 22, 23, he gives Moses the rest of the laws. In chapter 20, when he offers Moses the Ten Commandments, he makes it very clear, I am inscribing these 10 words with my finger. In other words, they are being given to you directly from me. And so God writes these 10 words or 10 commandments on 2 tablets of stone. And then he narrates to Moses the rest of the laws. And then when Moses comes down the mountain, he tells them what these 10 commandments are, and then he starts writing down in his own script, in his own handwriting, all the laws that he has committed to memory, obviously aided by the Holy Spirit. After this has been done, in chapter 24, then we have a very solemn ratification of this covenant that God has asked Moses to enact on behalf of his people, with his people, and God. So these are the directions that God offers Moses. Create an altar symbolizing God. And this altar should be built out of 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel. You can see very clearly that the altar is a covenant symbol of God coming together with the 12 tribes of Israel, symbolized in the altar. And then Moses asks the young men to slaughter bulls, and then they bring huge bowls of blood, 2 huge bowls of blood. The first bowl of blood he splashes on the altar. And then the second bowl of blood he splashes on the people, making it very clear that in this covenant union, they are now sharing the same life symbolized by blood, which is life. And only God is the author of life, and therefore you cannot eat or drink blood in food or in sacrifice. And so the blood of the animal had always to be poured out and never eaten in a cooked meal. So God is making it very clear to them that through this covenant relationship, from now on, we will share the same life. You will be sharing in my life, and that is possible because I have created you in my image and likeness, thereby giving you the capacity to enjoy intimacy with me in covenant union. And after that, then God invites Moses. And now, with Moses, you have Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, along with 70 elders of Israel. And they all trek up the mountain. And then they come into God's presence. And we are told they saw God and they did not die. You can see very clearly that God now has brought them into much, much greater intimacy. While they are still in awe of God, they are now much more comfortable. You can see God is beginning to re-establish these very harmonious relationships between them and Him. And you can see that this family of 70 plus Israelites, Hebrews, are now becoming a covenant family with God and with each other, with one another. And so then we are told, and in God's presence, they celebrate the establishment of the covenant with God through a meal. And as we know, as humans, whenever we celebrate a feast, we celebrate it through a meal. And the quintessential celebration through a meal, as we know, it began in the Old Testament with the Passover feast, but quintessentially in the New Covenant, it is Eucharist. And so after they have established uh, and ratified this covenant with God, they come back to God's people full of joy and full of celebration. And they stay with God at Mount Horeb, at Mount Sinai, for almost a year, because gradually God is bringing about a profound transformation through their formation into covenant life. Uh, I will take another episode to focus primarily and exclusively on the Ten Commandments. So you can see God will never renege on His promise to have created us in His image and likeness, which on His part is a perfect decision. And no matter what we throw at God in human history, through our sinfulness, through our evil, all of which is our addition to God's perfect plan and decision in creating us in His image and likeness, God will never give up on us. God will write straight on crooked lines and keep relentlessly bringing us back to Him. So, this covenant with Moses, called the Mosaic covenant with Moses and his people, is a very significant covenant, pointing in the direction of Jesus toward a covenant that will be perfect, established through the sacrifice of Jesus on Mount Calvary, another mountain on Mount Calvary. God bless you.
Making Great Saints is made possible by Our Ladies Healing Center and God's Embrace Ministries. For more information on Our Ladies Healing Center's healing program, visit OurLadiesHealingCenter.com. For ongoing formation and daily discipleship through God's Embrace Ministries, visit godsembrace.org.